When you listen to Neil deGrasse Tyson speak, you get the impression of a perfectly logical discourse, shaped to sound humble, open-minded, and rooted in science. But what appears to be a neutral position actually hides several fundamental contradictions that I will clarify in this analysis. The goal is not to reject science. On the contrary, it is to place the discussion back in its true context, an understanding that science describes part of reality but does not exhaust reality itself. From the beginning of the conversation, Tyson states that we know only 4% of the universe. In other words, 96% of reality consists of forces, matter, and energies that we do not understand and cannot define. This admission of ignorance should logically lead to great humility and a cautious intellectual posture. Yet, only a few minutes later, he explains that this ignorance cannot in any case be used to conclude the existence of a God or a higher intelligence. But why is that conclusion forbidden? Why does a scientist who confesses ignorance of 96% of the cosmos allow himself to dismiss the divine hypothesis so quickly? His discourse here is not scientific, it is philosophical. And when a scientist presents his personal philosophy as an established fact, that is where confusion begins. When Tyson says that history shows that whenever something was attributed to God, science later explained it, he is using a biased equation. The Greeks attributed lightning to Zeus. Yes, science demystified that primitive belief. But to then claim that every unknown will always eventually be explained materially is a philosophical leap, not a scientific conclusion. In science, you cannot extrapolate a historical trend into a universal law, especially when science itself acknowledges it does not understand what makes up most of the cosmos. Science explains how phenomena work. It has never explained why they exist or why the universe is fine-tuned in a way that allows life. Gravity, electromagnetism, quantum mechanics, cosmological constants, everything is calibrated with such improbable precision that many physicists, including non-believers, acknowledge that this leaves the door open to intelligence, design, or a higher form of organization. Tyson says he likes the word Godspeed. He says he enjoys the musical Jesus Christ Superstar. This allows him to say, "See, I'm not a militant atheist." But this does not answer the essential question. Why does he refuse to rationally consider the hypothesis of a higher intelligence in a universe that is mostly unknown? He wants to place himself in a comfortable zone, neither believer nor militant atheist, but a cautious scientist. Yet this is not caution, it is ideology. It is the idea that the universe must be explained only by material laws, even if those laws are unknown. Saying that God is never a relevant hypothesis is not science, it is dogma. The scientific method does not allow you to exclude a hypothesis before examining it. Yet Tyson excludes it before it is even formulated. When he claims that God should not be placed in the gaps of our knowledge because history shows science will eventually explain them, he adopts a closed posture. One could reply that this reasoning is equivalent to saying, we don't understand human consciousness, but if we search long enough, we will eventually reduce it to chemical processes. This is not a scientific conclusion. It is a materialist belief. Yes, science progresses, but it has never proven that reality has no spiritual dimension. It has never proven that the universe was not initiated by an intelligence. It has never proven that consciousness emerges mechanically from matter. In fact, the more quantum physics progresses, the more the foundations of classical materialism crumble. The discussion about vegans is another example. Tyson criticizes radical vegans by explaining that they eat avocados produced through the exploitation of billions of bees. He says that if vegans were truly coherent, they should defend ticks, mosquitoes, and even parasites. This passage brings nothing to the scientific or philosophical debate. It only shows that Tyson enjoys cosmic humor and easy caricatures. It is not an argument, it is a diversion. Even if the joke is amusing, it has no connection with the debate on consciousness, morality, or the origin of the universe. One cannot answer the question of God by talking about baby carrots and plant-based aliens. This is a way to distract the public and avoid the real subject. What Tyson carefully avoids is answering the fundamental question: why is there something rather than nothing? Why do the laws of physics exist? Why do dark matter and dark energy behave in an intelligible but unexplained way? Why is the universe fine-tuned with such mathematical precision that the slightest variation would make life impossible? Why does consciousness exist in a cosmos where nothing explains how a particle becomes a thinking being? Science describes the how. The why belongs to philosophy, metaphysics, and spirituality. When a scientist refuses to address this dimension, he leaves science and enters dogma. The passage about Isaac Newton reveals another contradiction. Tyson says he would like to have dinner with Newton but would send him back after 5 minutes because he would ask too many questions. But Newton was not only one of the greatest scientists in history, he was also deeply religious. Newton believed that his discoveries confirmed a divine order, an intelligent architecture of the universe. He wrote more about theology than about mathematics. Why ignore this historical fact? Because it disturbs the modern narrative that wants to oppose science and faith. Once again, history is reshaped to support a personal ideological position. In reality, this video demonstrates the permanent tension between two worldviews. A materialist worldview that wants to explain the universe without ever mentioning the divine hypothesis, and a metaphysical worldview that recognizes that reality far exceeds what science can measure. Science has never proven that God does not exist. Science has never demonstrated that consciousness is a biological accident. Science has never explained the origin of the laws themselves. Saying that science will eventually explain everything is a belief. Saying that God is not a necessary hypothesis is an opinion. Claiming that humanity is moving toward a purely material explanation of everything is a prophecy, not a scientific conclusion. The true scientific spirit accepts the unknown. It does not deny it. It does not replace it with ideology. It simply states, we do not know, and all hypotheses must be examined, including that of a higher intelligence. When Tyson affirms that he has no reason to believe that God will be found at the center of the unknown, he speaks as a materialist, not as a scientist. A scientist opens the door. A materialist closes it. In the end, this debate is not about religion or science. It is about intellectual coherence. You cannot say, we ignore 96% of reality, and then claim, we know God has nothing to do with it. That is a contradiction. You cannot use science to dismiss hypotheses that science cannot test. This is neither logical, nor neutral, nor intellectually rigorous.